Fondation Jean-Jaurès.
Penser pour agir.
The return of geopolitics on the European continent raises important questions about cohesion, foreign policy, and the values that Europe shall defend. Yet, despite its support of Ukraine, the EU is not epitome of virtue. Some of its member states are a source of vulnerabilities. This is the case of Hungary. The country is at odds with the EU's liberal democratic model and geopolitical ambitions, and it has influence in the Western Balkans. To discuss this influence and Hungary's agenda in the Western Balkans, I received today Luka Šterić. Luka, you're a researcher at the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. You have published with colleagues of yours a study mapping Hungary's influence in the Western Balkans. The study is called Balkans Observatory. I am Florent Marciacq, director of the Observatory Balkans at the Fondation Jean-Jaurès. Hi, Luka.
Hello, salut.
Bonjour. Luka, the appointment of Oliver Várhelyi as Commissioner for Enlargement in 2019 has not gone unnoticed. Yet the interest of, in Hungary's influence in the Western Balkans, well, it quickly faded away after these episodes. But Hungary's influence did not in the region. Can you map for us a little bit this influence out? Where do you see a Hungarian connection in the Western Balkans?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we did a very comprehensive study, I would say, about different tools of influence and different strategic goals of Hungary in the Western Balkans, trying to map it all out. And we have noticed that in the last decade, especially, there has been a big increase of the influence and the presence of Hungary in the Western Balkans. Previously, the Western Balkans were just a peripheral part of the borderline for Hungary, but in the last decade, especially, the strategic influence and strategic importance of the Western Balkans has risen high on the Budapest agenda, I would say. And if you talk about what are some of the major ways in which Hungary influences the Western Balkans, you can talk about it in different ways. First of all, political one. You have mentioned Oliver Várhelyi, and Hungary has taken somewhat of a leading role when it comes to the EU enlargement of the region, in its own way, of course, having a commissioner for enlargement, but also being very vocal about accepting the whole region of the Western Balkans as soon as possible and pretty much without any conditionality within the EU. So it has been a spokesman for this within the EU itself, and therefore an important ally, I would say, for many of the Western Balkan countries trying to achieve the membership. Also, bilaterally speaking, political influence of Hungary in the Western Balkans has increased, especially when it comes to the relations with some of the authoritarian leaders and regimes in the Western Balkans, especially Serbia, as a primary ally of Hungary in the region, and also Republika Srpska and Milorad Dodik, but also North Macedonia and other countries in the region as well. So in that sense, politically speaking, Hungary is much more present in the Western Balkans, but that doesn't end there. Economically speaking, Hungary has, the level of FDIs in the Western Balkans has grown continuously. And especially important is the banking sector, but even more important is the energy sector, and especially in today's day and age, as you know, with the war in Ukraine and the energy being such an important part of the politics in these geopolitical times. The importance of the Western Balkans on the Hungarian agenda, the Turkish stream, but also the Hungarian special position when it comes to the Druzhba oil pipeline from Russia and the exemptions from sanctions play an important role in this dynamic between Hungary and the Western Balkans itself. Mm-hmm. And finally, the soft power of Hungary in the Western Balkans has also increased significantly and has a lot to do with the image Viktor Orbán is trying to present to the Western Balkans, and also the leaders of the Western Balkans are trying to kind of achieve through his image, especially now, and we're going to probably talk about it later, with Russia being isolated in Europe, of course, and Viktor Orbán playing this role of the different Europe, the true authoritarian or illiberal leader that shows a different path towards the EU and a different the different way of acting within the EU itself. So in all of these cases, you can see Hungary's influence being much stronger in the last decade than before.
And in this report, which is a very comprehensive, which when you study these influences, you also mentioned in the media, in the field of media. Can you tell us a little bit how this connection is unfolding?
Yeah, well, Hungary is building somewhat of a media empire in the Western Balkans. It started with Slovenia actually, and then it's spilled over to North Macedonia and Serbia to a certain extent. With Hungarian moguls, very often close to the Viktor Orbán's regime, are buying some of the local medias or even national media, and through that, of course, pursuing business interests, trying to present some of the economic interests of Hungary as important ones, and from marketing standpoint, but even more importantly, ideologically speaking, it is serving certain agenda and certain way of thinking about some important issues for Hungary, such as the illiberal policies, anti-migration issues, several of these issues. So in that sense, even sometimes pro-Russian narratives, of course. So in that sense, it is very important to follow this dynamic of increasing media influence of Hungary in the Western Balkans as well.
And so precisely, it's not, as you mentioned, and you have mapped it out, it's not a coincidental engagement we have on different levels and layers. There is an agenda behind, so this serves an agenda. Can you tell us a little bit what Viktor Orbán regime seeks to achieve with this engagement in the Western Balkans?
Yeah, well, it's very important to understand that there is an overlap of strategic goals, which is within the national Hungarian influence, some of those long-term goals which are going to be pursued regardless of who is in power, and of course some of the political goals of Orbán regime in Hungary currently. So we need to kind of follow this dynamic, and it very often overlaps, and there's no a clear-cut line. First of all, the most important influence, the most important interest for Hungary in the region is achieving stability of the Western Balkans. It is a bordering region. It is very important to, prevent any of the possible spillover effects of some of the crises, which, as we all know, can very often spark in the Western Balkans. So in that sense, Hungary is very committed to, the peacekeeping missions, especially in Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, it plays an important mediator buffer kind of role between some of these leaders, especially Vučić and Dodik on one side, and then some of the European leaders on the other side. So in that sense, stability is of most importance. And I would say that's a strategic goal. Hungary, also the EU enlargement itself, as EU accession is seen as a stabilization tool for the Western Balkans, and of course the way in which Hungary can project its influence in this strategically important region. So this is also something that is being pursued, for example. But then some other things, such as, for example, close collaboration with some of these illiberal leaders and regimes and parties in the Western Balkans, they are much more connected to the political goals of Orbán's regime in Budapest, because this is the way of him to project the influence in the region, to increase even his importance within the EU's some of the EU leaders' eyes, because he's the one who can sometimes talk to Orbán or Putin, or also Putin, but to Vučić and Dodik when there's a crisis appearing, and somebody who can be the mediator in that sense. So in that sense, and also it gives him the ideological legitimization back home in Hungary, and also increases his soft power within the region. So in all of these senses, and of course pursuing business ties. So this is one of the things. Other thing that we can talk about, which is particularly maybe Orbán, interests within the Western Balkans, is controlling the migration route. We all know how big anti-immigration policies play a role in Viktor Orbán's rise to the power, and of course him sticking to the power. And it is a very important task of his to pursue this policy and make bilateral deals also with some of the local governments in terms of controlling migration routes. So he made bilateral agreements with Serbia, with North Macedonia, about policing on the border areas of between Serbia and Macedonia, and North Macedonia and Greece, of course. But also there's this trilateral agreement between Austria, Hungary, and Serbia about controlling migration routes. So all of these things are kind of interlinked. So you can talk about strategic Hungarian goals, but also you can talk about specific political goals that Orbán's regime is pursuing. And although we do expect that even if there would be a change of regime in Hungary, Western Balkans and Serbia especially would remain one of the key priorities for Hungarian foreign policy in the future. Some of these priorities might change, and this collaboration might look very differently in the future.
Mm-hmm. And on the geopolitical level, so in Budapest, we have a regime which is more friendly to Russia, much more friendly than other EU member states. And in the West Balkans, we have Serbia, which also is a regime, which also has a regime which is very much more friendly to Russia. How does it play out? This friendliness towards Russia, this connection between the two in Serbia and Hungary, and how should the EU, according to you, try to counter this Hungarian influence in geopolitical times?
Well, it is. I mean, this is something that we have touched upon in this study. We'll probably be working on another study for next year, probably, because it's going to be a big study about how this war in Ukraine has changed the dynamic between Hungary and Western Balkans itself. Because I would say that just the preliminary kind of thoughts on this, there are three main ways in which the war in Ukraine and the changing landscape of geopolitical ties within Europe has influenced this relationship. First of all, politically speaking, Hungary being the most vocal within the EU against the sanctions towards Russia has kind of given the window of opportunity for some of the leaders in the region itself to kind of also confront these sanctions. And this is particularly important, of course, for Serbia, but also for Bosnia and Herzegovina in that sense. So this is one, and vice versa, of course, it plays out into this dynamic of we're not the only ones in Europe who are kind of moderate towards Russian positions within Ukraine. This is political part of it, of the equation. Even more important, I think, is the energy part of the equation, because with the war in Ukraine and with all the troubles with energy supplies coming through Ukraine towards Central and Western Europe, the importance of the Turkish stream has risen increasingly, incredibly, in the eyes of Budapest. So in that sense, it is of crucial importance. The region itself is of crucial importance for achieving economic stability for Hungary itself. So in that sense, this collaboration is even more important. And on the other hand, Hungary being exempt from the sanctions towards Russia when it comes to the gas supplies through Druzhba, oil supplies through Druzhba oil pipeline also plays an important dynamics and role. And we have seen some of these announcements about Serbia maybe wanting to attach to Druzhba pipeline in near future to kind of diversify its energy supplies. So this is a different type of dynamics that the Ukrainian war has significantly influenced. And thirdly speaking, it's ideological. Viktor Orbán is now even more important in the eyes of the local publics that some of these autocratic regimes is kind of addressing, because he can play the role to a certain extent that Putin has played, because now, of course, it's not that easy to play on the card of Putin and friendship with Putin because you might, provoke too much some of the Western leaders. So in that sense, Orbán can play this the father figure, I would say, of these liberal regimes within the Western Balkans. So in that sense, it also increases the soft power that Hungary has in the region and plays it into very different dynamics. And I think that Hungary is here to stay. I mean, when you talk about the confronting Hungarian influence, it's very difficult to see the more accentism on geopolitical ties and geopolitical dynamics, the more important role actually Orbán has in that. So if you put accent on this, it might actually increase Hungary's influence even more in the Western Balkans. So it's a very particular dynamic, and we're about to see how it's going to play out. But I would maybe invite you to wait for our study for next year. But this is going to be an important topic moving forward.
Thanks a lot, Luka. Thanks indeed. So we will wait for this study, but I can recommend already this one which you published, Charles Balkan. So you're drawing attention and shedding lights on a dynamic which is quite often overlooked. And we tend to see vulnerabilities only externally, down there in the Western Balkans, where we don't notice that sometimes these vulnerabilities are very much created or fueled by some member states, and
Absolutely.
that is very much something to keep in mind and to be very vigilant about it. So thanks a lot, Luka, and we will wait for your next study. Goodbye.
Merci, Florent.